Welcome to Mr. Creations. Today's episode is titled Two Old Men Talking. Today I'm speaking with Nathan Goettge, my father-in-law. Some of the subjects we talk about are triggering, so viewer discretion is advised. The subjects of surviving storms, traumatic events, and racism are touched upon. Please, if you listen to this, try to understand the context of the situations being talked about. Please join us in this journey through Nathan's life and experiences. I'm glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you've done in your lifetime?
Okay. Well, I lived in Houston, southern Mississippi, eastern Ohio, mid Minnesota, Illinois, Washington, the state of Washington. I think I had the best childhood in the South, just because I was just like a free ranger. I was able to go everywhere.
Okay.
My mom didn't restrict me very much because she was sick almost all the time. So I was pretty much on my own most of the time as far as what I should and shouldn't do. So I more or less just came home to eat and sleep. And then I spent a little time with my grandparents in eastern Ohio for about 6 months, and graduated in Ohio. Went to high school in Minnesota and Ohio. Graduated, went to Kent State University, graduated, and started working in East Cleveland at a vacuum cleaning company as an industrial engineer. Then later, as an industrial engineer at Eaton Axle in East Cleveland, Ohio. Then I met Susie. We got married. Then I lost my job and we moved out to the state of Washington, and I worked for a couple of different companies in the state of Washington. And then we decided to have Sarah, which we did.
Yeah.
But we ended up back in Ohio for a while, and then Illinois. And then I went back to work I got my paralegal degree then from Roosevelt University in Chicago. And I thought I'd become a paralegal, but that didn't work out too well for me. So eventually I went to work as an industrial engineering again for a company that was Boeing, then got sold out to another company. And then I lost my job there, and I came back out to Seattle and started working at the Boeing company again, working on the 787.
Oh.
So I retired from that, and that's where I am today. I'm living in the Puget Sound area and retired.
That's the best life. Yep.
And I'm glad my whole family's around me.
It's good. Families needed these days.
Right.
Yeah. We're hoping to make that make it easier for us to see you.
Oh, we can't wait to see you.
Can you tell us about going through the hurricane in Mississippi, and tell us your story about the snakes on the seawall?
Well, Betsy happened in about 1965. It was called Hurricane Betsy, which actually made a beeline for the Mississippi River. New Orleans and where I lived in Waveland, Mississippi at the time, it's about 30 miles apart. So we got a lot of the wind and storm surge from that. But we spent the night away from the house during the hurricane. And when the hurricane was over, had, it was like a jet roaring past our windows. If you can imagine the sounds of a jet's roar, that's what it sounded like.
Yeah.
And the sky was green. So the next day, after we had spent the night away from the house, we came back to the house, which was on the beach. And our house was about 14 feet up from the edge of the water. And the tide came right up to our door. It didn't get into the house, but the tide came right up to the door. And so we spent the night in the house, and then the next day I went out wandering to see what had happened with the hurricane.
Yeah.
And the roads were tore up. There was a lot of trees down. Some of the houses became missing. Almost all the piers that were out in the water were gone. Walking down to the water, our house was probably 700-800 feet back from the water. And walking down to the water, you could see that the leaves of the trees were just stripped off. There are no leaves on the trees left. And one of the oddest things that happened in my mind was the spring flowers started to come out.
Okay.
And this was in September. So I walked down to the seawall, what was left of it, and I noticed that a layer of, it looked like grass, was out into the water from the seawall outward, probably 300 feet, 100 yards, maybe 200 yards. It was within that range.
Mm.
So I was just kind of looking over what it was, and I thought I'd just sit down on the seawall to kind of take it in. And I heard this rattlesnake underneath my feet.
Okay.
And I looked down and there was a rattlesnake under my feet.
Okay.
And I was able to get away from it. But I ran back to the house to get our gun. We had a .22 gun.
Yeah.
So I went back to the house, got the gun, came back, told my brother and my dad that there was a snake under the seawall. They came back. By the time I came back, a National Guardsman had come by and shot the snake and put it over our fence. It was like 10 feet long.
That's a big snake.
And when you looked out over the mat, there were poisonous snakes everywhere. We probably shot maybe 100 poisonous, not all the snakes, poisonous snakes.
Yeah.
And there were people up and down the seawall doing the same thing. They were shooting all the snakes. And there were nutria, if you know what nutria are, they're just like a huge rat.
Yeah.
They were in the water. There was otters in the water. There was all kinds of wildlife in the water. Walking on this mat of grass or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what it was when the Hurricane Betsy came up towards New Orleans, it came up the mouth of the Mississippi, and they would have what they call the Chandelier Islands out there in the Gulf of Mexico. It blew over that, and it must have washed everything that was on one of those islands up to our house.
Okay.
So all the wildlife and anything else that was on that island got washed up to the house. Later, the Corps of Engineers came in and they pumped sand against the seawall. So there's a beach now.
Yeah.
On that seawall, maybe a couple 100 yards out, at least 100 yards out from the seawall.
I remember going through Hurricane Juan.
Was it Nova Scotia?
Yeah.
Okay.
The sound of the jet engine, that's exactly it. It sounds like a jet engine just outside your wall. And then the next day, it was in the end of September when this happened, so it was starting to get really cold.
Yeah.
And we were lucky in that we lived in a house that was 100 years old, and we had the old oil space heaters. So we fired those up and were able to get the house relatively warm, but it was still pretty cold.
I can imagine.
Yeah, the flowers, the the spring flowers did come out in our garden in the front. It's that sudden blast of warm air that comes in with a hurricane really tricks the plants. It makes them think, oh, well, it's time to grow again. And then winter hit, they died off again, but they came back properly the next year.
Yeah, so, mine came back too. They came back, but it was so weird when they came out.
Yeah, it's, and the morning after is really eerie. You walk out and everything's kind of silent.
Yes.
And the greenness is still there, but it's starting to dissipate. It's odd. And out here, it turns green before the storm. It's weird. On the island, it's the same as. So it's funny. We live in a weird world, for sure.
We do. It's stranger than fiction.
Yep. Where were you when we landed on the moon?
Yeah. I had moved away from Mississippi at that time, and I was living. Actually, I think I was living in Minnesota at the time, but my parents had split up by that time. They divorced and they were living in separate locations. My mom lived in Ohio and my dad lived in Minnesota. And in this particular summer, I visited my mom in Ohio, spent the summer with her, and went to a church camp. And at the church camp, on a special occasion, they brought in a television set, and everybody gathered around at the television set and watched the landing on the moon. The whole thing was kind of anticlimactic to me, because I grew up in Mississippi with a lot of my life had to do with my dad working for Boeing at the time. With NASA. He worked in New Orleans, at the Michoud building, and then later at NASA at the Mississippi Test Facility, building the locks and waterways and roads up to the test site. And a lot of the social life that my dad was around were NASA folks, either NASA folks or Boeing folks. And in fact, in between Texas and Mississippi, we went to live about a month in Alabama, and my dad met Von Braun, the head of the NASA project, for a brief moment, I think. I don't know. He just said he met him. So we were around NASA and Boeing folks. And so the landing of the moon was, I think it was a big turning point in our country. But it was sort of anticlimactic to me, because everything, from the time I moved to Mississippi till that time was NASA and Boeing, as far as my dad was concerned. And of course, being around him, I got to tour the Michoud plant. I never been to the Mississippi Test Facility site per se. I've been around it. never went to it.
What it was quite a historic moment. There are naysayers out there that say we never went to the moon, but I don't understand those guys.
Even when the astronauts have a video saying they denied it, I firmly believe that we went.
Yeah.
They shot that rocket off and they landed on the moon. They brought rocks back. I saw one of the rocks at college.
There you go.
Of course, you know, they'll say, well, they can put any rock there.
Yeah.
But it's just hard for me to believe that it was staged. I just don't believe it. I mean, it's possible, but very highly improbable, in my view.
It's like flat earthers. Basically, flat earthers tend to say that the earth is flat, and they won't, even when they prove that the world is round, they won't accept it. It's an interesting quirk of people that when they speak of something, they're not likely to take it at face value. They want to learn for themselves what's going on, and I can understand that a little bit.
Right. I get the notion. You know, I don't live in their shoes. Of course, I don't know what they know or why they profess what they do, but I kind of get the impression they like being in that position of adversity, and they want to stick to it. They want to stick to that story, and it's part of their life now.
Yeah, it's their identity.
Yeah.
You went to Kent State. For those who don't know, the National Guard fired on unarmed protesters, killing 4 and injuring 9. Were you there when it happened? And what kind of impact did it have on the school long term?
I was in high school.
You're in high school.
And I didn't really understand the impact when it happened. I saw everything on the news, and people around me in Minnesota and then later Ohio got their take on it. Generally, I think at the time, people generally thought that it was foolish students who shouldn't have been doing what they were doing. They could have done things better than what they were doing at the time. Why didn't they just stick to their studies and graduate? And why did they have to get involved with stuff like that?
Yeah.
And the news kind of portrayed some of the students as communist sympathizers, or the plants who were sympathetic to the communists, or maybe even directly communists, somehow connected to stirring things up in Kent State among the students. And some students got too impassionate. Later, I learned a lot of things about what happened at Kent State. Of course, I did go to Kent State a couple of years later. One of the things I learned I read just a little bit of Michener's book on it. He has a book. Most of the kids that were in that riot were just regular kids. They were regular kids that you and I grew up with. Mm-hmm. I go to school in Ohio and high school, and you would never think any of these kids in high school were communists. They all pledged allegiance to the flag and good citizens in the sports in their school, and they weren't in any ideology to overthrow anything. All they thought about was girls and going to college, or boys and going to college.
Yeah.
they thought about their future. And later going to school there, I went there. It was a easy place for me to go to school because I could start out going to a branch college for 2 or 3 years and then transfer my credits to the main college.
Okay.
So that's the main reason why I went to Kent State. It was just an easy road for me, an easy path to get a bachelor's degree. So when I went there, I kind of listened and watched different people say things at Kent State about what happened. And then later, I keep kind of going back to it and studying what happened there. And what really happened was that the kids, I call them kids, but they were really young adults, over 18, under 30, basically. A lot of them, it was known as a party school. There was a party area in the town of Kent.
Okay.
And kids went there and partied during the weekend. And sometimes they got rowdy. In this particular moment before this incident happened, they had some burning going downtown Kent. There was some bonfires in the street. And they were getting a little raucous. They were kind of running around, getting a little squirrely.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly who called in to the Ohio National Guard. Somebody either Kent, the town of Kent, or Kent State itself. I doubt really that anybody at Kent State called in, but the governor of Ohio, Jim Rose, got kind of excited, and that weekend, I think the students got a little perturbed about the whole situation, and there was a wooden ROTC building in the middle of the campus. This was about the same time that Nixon was going into Cambodia and bombing Cambodia. And the students were upset that, you didn't say anything about escalating the war. We're not really all that keen on you doing anything in Vietnam anyway. We know lots of people that have gone over there, gotten killed or hurt.
Mm. And
people know today that a lot of these folks that come back from Vietnam and the Mideast, they have other problems too. War is just bad. And Nixon kind of on his own went into Cambodia. Well, the Kent Staters were really upset about that. So they had the ROTC building in the middle of the campus there, and they decided to burn it down, and they burned it down.
Oh.
So a lot of folks, a lot of older folks who weren't close to the situation, my goodness, maybe they're going to burn down the whole campus.
Yeah.
So they sent in the National Guard to kind of try to keep things safe for the community and Kent State and all the buildings. The kids going to school and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, the kids were kind of angry, were very angry at the notion of sending in the National Guard to Kent State. And that's where really the friction and everything started, that people who sent in those troops, they really didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know how to handle crowds, and the kids kind of just made fun of them a little bit.
Mm.
And it just sounded like a bad situation to me.
It sounds like they added fuel to the fire by sending in the National Guard. instead of sending in a negotiator to kind of talk to the kids, find out where they were actually at.
Yeah, and there were actually professors trying to talk to the kids and talk to the National Guardsmen. And there was some reasoning that was trying to go on. Somehow that did not work with the National Guard.
When you have two sides that are, one side that's being told that these are communists who want to take over the town, and the other side are the kids who see the National Guard as a threat because of what Nixon did, sending in troops. It's like two trains coming at each other. It's not going to end well. He needs something like a big bouncy ball right in the center of him to say, okay, both of you need to calm down.
Yeah, the National Guardmen firing live rounds, and they didn't just shoot them at the students. Well, they did, but they shot everywhere. They didn't just shoot one direction, or maybe some of them were bad shots. I don't know. And who fired this first shot? It's just a stinky situation. It was a very stinky, shouldn't have happened situation.
It's true. It's true.
And as far as what it did to the school, it gave it a bad reputation.
Yeah.
When I was going there was always kind of a cloud hanging over the school that, this happened, and they had ceremonies every year of it when it occurred, and people really didn't want to talk about it too much, but you could tell that the school kind of wanted to move on. I think a lot of the students wanted either to move on or not talk about it. But there was a cloud over it, and Kent State did not have a good reputation at that time.
It's understandable that would happen. Yeah.
What parent would want to send their kids into harm's way with the National Guard? No.
That's true. It's true.
I'll send my kid to Ohio State instead.
Yeah. I don't really blame them. That was any school that tragedies happen in. It's gonna kind of have a little bit of a cloud around it for a while after that.
And probably I would say at least 10 years after I graduated from school. This was in 76. Up through 85 or later. Everywhere I ever went, if I mentioned, like in a job interview or any other situation where I went to Kent State, oh, were you around with the Kent State shootings?
Yeah, that's
that reputation does follow them.
It does. And it's unfortunate that happens.
And they kind of look at, when you go for a job interview, they kind of look at you with one eye and kind of think, well, you ain't part of that.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. And it can throw a wrench into an interview real quick if you answer wrong. Oh, not good. We'll be right back. Where were you when Martin Luther King Jr. gave the infamous speech?
So, I was living in Mississippi at the time, 1963. And again, I'm totally unaware of, just kind of passing on the news of Martin Luther King. His segregation in the blacks in Mississippi and in Texas, strange. It's just, it was strange no matter where I lived, but it was certainly strange there. For me, it wasn't, being a kid probably more than anything. There was no problem with me and and black people. But the thing is it's kind of mysterious, but being in Mississippi and in Texas, I hardly ever saw any black people. Even though there were thousands around me.
Yeah.
I hardly ever saw them.
Your social group wasn't that.
And you can kind of say the same thing about the black folks during my time growing up, as you could say with Kent State. Your only impressions you would have is what other people would talk about, or what was on the news, and you thought, why don't these black people just behave and not get into trouble? Why are they getting in trouble all the time? And why are we having to do anything to keep them out of trouble? I didn't understand what was really going on, or what the problem was for black people, or anything like that growing up as a child.
Yeah.
A lot of families, a lot of times, I only heard my dad mention one time when we were going to church, and he was part of the church, but there's two levels in church, and they would greet people at the door, and they'd bring them in and sit them down as part of his duties.
Yeah.
In the church. And one time a black family came to the door, and they turned the black family away.
Okay.
And I didn't know anything about it. And it wasn't until much later, it wasn't until probably years later, when we weren't living in Mississippi anymore, my dad related to me. He kind of tried to reason with others at the church and said, why don't we just let those black people in and let them stay? The guy said that we would never let a black person in this church.
Racism has no bounds. And the second part of the question is, how did his assassination affect you? I think it didn't affect you until later.
I would say again that I was enough out of the realm of the social life between whites and blacks that I viewed it like it shouldn't have happened. Something is amiss there.
Yeah.
So it took more studying on my part to really understand what was going on. I actually didn't hear anything about anybody discussing his assassination at all, except on the news.
Okay.
And like I said, it wasn't until later till I actually learned more about it.
Yeah.
And as far as that goes, as far as learning more about it later, I realized more and more how we have laws about equality and justice.
In this segment, we're talking about George Floyd.
But I would say what happened in Minnesota to that black man being held down by the foot of the white guy and then smothered to death is a very good example of the misunderstanding of white people with black people.
Yeah.
And you can see how I understood it up to now.
Yeah.
It's two different worlds. And it's not saying that the white person or the black person is bad. We live under the same laws. The black person isn't treated equally to the white person.
You can't really have equality without the education to teach them everyone is equal. Can you tell us a little story about flying through a storm?
Well, there was a couple times where I we flew through a storm going either on business or coming back from family outing. But I don't know if it's the one story that I told about. It would be a very short story. It's short. It's short in the sense that we flew into a storm. The people in the plane that I was in a small jet, like a 737, but it was probably more like a 727. And the plane was rocking and rolling and going up and down, and you just didn't know if you were going to make it or not.
Yeah.
It got that bad. We put on our seatbelts and things like that. I think you've related a similar story to me before, coming back from Nova Scotia.
Yep.
And we finally landed. It was like no big deal after we landed, but it certainly was a big deal because we were in peril.
Yeah. Yeah. On the way back from Calgary, we were at 32,000 feet, and we dropped to 14,000 feet in a few seconds. It's scary when that happens. You don't know if the plane's going to continue to drop or not.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in that plane.
No. We were lucky in that the pilot was a former military fighter pilot and understood what was happening right away, and just went with it instead of panicking and trying to adjust.
Right, you swam with the river.
Yeah, and you got to do that every once in a while when you get into a situation where you make the wrong choice, you're gone.
You would think that a lot of these pilots, if they haven't done it in simulator, they've done it at least a few times during their career.
Yeah.
So they know there's another side. You'll come out the other side, but it's certainly scary when it happens.
Yeah. Your life kind of flashes before your eyes a bit there.
The pilot's a lot more confident than we are.
Oh, yeah. Have you had any unusual encounters, paranormal, cryptid, alien, or other?
Well, I suppose the most unusual thing would be after my mom died, she appeared in my bedroom a couple of times and talked to me about how she was okay. And that was pretty much the conversation. She was okay. And I don't know, Susie, my wife, thought that it was just me under duress with my mother dying.
Yeah.
Or a ghost, I don't know.
With me, when I was a baby, my grandmother would talk to me. And she'd been dead. She died 10 years before I was born, in the house that I was living in. And the first name that I spoke was her name, Alice. So what happened with your mom could have been your mom coming back to check on you and make sure that you understood that she was okay, and
sort of put me at ease.
Put you at ease and kind of
make it final.
Were you able to say goodbye to her when she passed?
No, I was away.
Okay.
So, so yeah, maybe it was just my mind thinking that there should have been closure.
Yeah. It could be that. It could be that she just came back to give you that closure, so that you understood that she's okay, and
carry on.
Yeah. Live your life. Losing a parent, well, losing both your parents is really rough on you and changes you quite a lot. Having that opportunity is actually, it's good. Can you tell us about nuclear drills in grade school?
So I can remember when I was in third grade, and we had these wooden desks that were seat and desk combined, but they made us get under the desk, I suppose, real close to where our seat was,
Yeah.
and put our hands over our head during the drill after some sort of like bell or something happened.
Yeah.
Put our hands over our head, and now I can't imagine what good that would have done to put your hands over your head if there was a nuclear blast. But that's what they wanted us to do under our desk.
Protects you from debris, I guess, but
and again, when those sorts of things happen, like the Cuban Missile Crisis or Russia, as a kid, you just don't think about what the consequences are going to be, or why would we want to even do that, or will it ever happen? It shouldn't ever happen.
Yeah.
So why are we doing this? It didn't even occur to me 15 minutes later that I should even be worried about it. Yeah. I carried all my life like something like that isn't even around. And it wasn't until much later, and you're much older, that you know that, being killed in a nuclear blast shouldn't be the most pleasant thing that ever happened to you. But as a kid, you don't realize that.
No, it's, you don't think beyond, no, this is just something that they want us to do. We're doing it. Okay.
Pretty much.
And later you figure out what's going on. The House Un-American Activities is a long-form name of the government agency that went after people deemed communists or communist sympathizers. Can you tell us what it was like to live through that? And do you feel that hysteria is similar to QAnon hysteria today?
Well, I'm gonna say that it's sort of two different subjects.
Yeah.
But I'll go back to Kent State for a moment. Maybe this is part of it. You kind of guide me on this question, the way I answer this.
Okay.
When I was at Kent State, one of the things they did to those demonstrators, they found out the name of the demonstrators, and they started a dossier on every student they could think of that participated in those Kent State riots.
Okay.
Without any judicial hearing or anything. So you went to Kent State, all of a sudden you had a dossier on you.
Okay.
You could have just been walking past one time and said, "What's that? Who's that kid?" And now you got a dossier on you. And people like Nixon are going to read it?
Yeah.
That certainly shouldn't be part of the Constitution that we live under.
True.
But it is. It is. And it is today. The rules really don't. Rules mean more for the rich and powerful than it does for the poor soul with just a gun that some cop happens to find in the back end of his car and then gets arrested for. Even though lawfully he's allowed to have it.
Yeah.
You get a dossier on you.
Yeah.
You're an agitator.
Yeah.
You're somebody to think, and if you go to work for somebody, they may ask you, "Have you ever been arrested before?" You might be just an innocent bystander at a a demonstration, which you're allowed to do under the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
But if you happen to get arrested, now you have a record, and your future employer wants to know that.
Yeah.
And if you don't answer truthfully, you could be fired today. You could be fired in the future if they ever found out about it.
It's true. And good luck getting hired if you admit to it. And
so our judicial system does not work as far as freedom is concerned.
No.
And a level playing field.
That's actually the same in Canada. It doesn't work. Once you get accused of something, you can be ousted from every organization you've ever been part of.
And you could be innocent, or just politically motivated by one thing.
Yeah.
But that's enough for the government to take attention, start a file on you.
Yeah.
And then you're segregated from other people when you go to a job interview.
Really, that's not right. There should be some checks and balances to that type of situation. But when has humanity ever done anything evenly?
I know. Anything I would say bad about the United States, I'm glad I'm living here.
Yeah. It's a good country.
But it does have its problems.
Yeah. And every country in the world has problems. Things that haven't been dealt with that need to be dealt with. I think the good thing in the States is that there's an air of openness about it that allows it to be brought into the public mind and people actually deal with it.
Yeah.
It may not be dealt with right away. It may end up being dealt with 20 years from now, but it's being dealt with.
Right. It's like me understanding what in the hell did happen when Martin Luther King got assassinated. What did that actually mean?
Yeah.
Most of us don't know.
No. Unless you were directly involved or part of the movement, you wouldn't have all that information. That
you have to seek it out and read about it.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people don't do. If they read more about these hard subjects, but hard subjects are something that people try to avoid. It's like negative emotions. People try to avoid them rather than deal with them. And when you don't deal with negative emotions, they come back to haunt you later.
Sure. I can understand they're exhaustive.
Yeah.
People don't want that.
But the more people educate themselves on a subject, the better they're able to deal with situations that involve stuff that relate to it. The QAnon hysteria, back to that.
That is a mystery to me, AJ. It really truly is. It's some kind of meme that some people have attached themselves to that has some meaning, like this JFK thing that they're coming back, and some people really truly believe that JFK Jr. is coming back. It's just I think it's a hysteria. I truly believe if that's what people really truly believe, it's a hysteria. Yeah. Or it's something that where, I guess going back to the education part, people need to educate themselves about.
Yeah. The internet is why we're able to do what we're doing right now.
Right. It does wonderful things. It does horrible things.
Yeah. It's all in what you use it for.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, a lot of people have been isolated. And when you're isolated, you become susceptible to coercion. And in the case of QAnon, a lot of people have been coerced into thinking the way they do. It's kind of like brainwashing to to a great sense. They've been brainwashed into thinking this is how reality is.
Doesn't make a person good or bad per se.
No, just makes them misinformed or uninformed. The doomsday clock.
Yeah. I kind of understand the gist of that. But
Yeah.
we're getting closer to nuclear annihilation. That's what she's saying.
Yeah.
And I imagine, especially with this Ukraine-Russia thing going on, I can see where somebody like Putin gets cornered and may make a calculated mistake. I just hope that there are more rational folks in Russia. Seems as though there's been rational folks in Russia up to this point.
Yeah. His advisors are kind of weak in one way.
Yeah.
In that they don't want to tell him things are going badly. On the other hand, what have they done to prevent nuclear war because of his reactions and what he wants?
The thing about Russia, they've always kind of been secretive. You kind of don't know really what's going on. You really only understand what's going on until after it happens, or somebody defects and comes here and tells us about what's going on.
And this kind of goes back to the conversation earlier that we were having about our perception being skewed by our environment.
Right. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of YouTubes from Russia people lately to get their perspective. They're kind of mostly perplexed about what's going on. And they mostly do not want war. So the way things are going now, things are distorted. They're just certainly distorted for the Russians. And you look at the face of these people. These are young sons and daughters. I watched one YouTube where these young boys were hustled into the back end of a truck and just ferried right into the combat.
Yeah.
You look at some of these young folks, they're your neighbors.
Yeah.
They're the people that you grew up with. They're the same folks. It's really, it's eye-opening in a way, I suppose.
Yeah. It's definitely a hard situation in Ukraine right now.
Because, I'm cheering on the Ukrainians, but these are
it's kids fighting
some mom's son.
There was one incident where we were watching a YouTube where this Russian soldier gave himself up to the Ukrainians. His grandmother was in a building that he bombed and had killed her, and didn't find out until he talked to his parents that he killed his own grandmother. And so he gave himself up to the Ukrainians, and he was talking to some people. They were giving him food, and he just completely broke down.
Sure.
And this kid, he was told that he was going there to defend the Ukrainian people.
Sure. He probably just came from a basketball game at his high school.
Yep.
That was his perspective up to that point.
Yeah. And throughout our entire conversation, it's all been about perspective and situations. We need to kind of take stock of what we're doing to each other in that way.
Yeah.
Because
we have to be cautious.
Yeah. And particularly now, everyone's emotions are high because of COVID and being isolated for so long. And I think that's why Putin went the way he did, because he's completely isolated himself.
Could be part of it, for sure. The COVID thing really was education for a lot of people over the last couple of years.
Yeah. In Putin's sense, it could be that he put himself in such a situation that his own mind is playing tricks on him, sending him down the road that he wants to take another country.
He's always been a KGB guy, so he has that mindset,
and that's kind of scary. He controls the country, and he could be a psychotic, having a psychotic episode.
I just see him as very cold.
Yeah.
Especially what he's doing to the Ukrainians right now. He's just very cold. I was thinking he was the last few days, the way I've learned about how many Ukrainians citizens he'd killed, he's much like Stalin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cold.
There's also his chief advisor is a Stalinist. So he could be feeding that personality in Putin, giving him direction towards that end, and creating havoc for everyone around. You have lived through some of the greatest triumphs and worst downfalls in modern history. What event affected you the most?
Well, I really do believe landing on the moon is a big event for all of mankind.
Yeah.
As far as the biggest, I think the world very much changed during 9/11. Those were really two pivotal points in my lifetime. There were other things like the Vietnam War or Desert Storm or other financial shenanigans in the United States. Certainly those were big events, and I have events of my family that happened, but those are probably the two biggest overarching events in my lifetime. It'd be the moon landing and 9/11.
The moon landing kind of proved the height of what we can strive for, right? 9/11 was kind of the worst thing that could happen. Everything to do with 9/11 was kind of weird. Yeah. It
put off a weird vibe.
Yeah, and the experiences I've had because of 9/11, I remember when it fell, and I remember.
Yeah, I didn't believe it when it first happened. I didn't believe it. I thought,
no,
something happened to the airplane and went into the building. And those buildings are strong enough; it could withstand a hit like that. So I thought I didn't think anything about it, but when that second one hit, I knew we were at war. Some way we were at war. And that's what I told everybody around me. I said, when that second plane hit, I said, the United States is at war.
Yeah, someone's attacked you. With the moon landing, it's affected everything since then. Technology has been developed because of it. We're planning to go back to the moon 2024. That's just 2 years away. Well, not even.
It's remarkable.
Yeah. Throughout your life, have you seen instances where the past has repeated itself?
Well, certainly, to a certain extent, you could say that about every war that ever occurred. A lot of times people say, well, that World War II will never happen again. Well,
and here we are.
A lot of kids growing up hated history. I know a lot of people, when they ever talk about school, they hate history. I understand. It can be boring, especially the way it's taught. But it certainly repeats. So if you know history, you got a window to the future, in my view.
Yeah. Speaking of being taught boringly, my high school teacher, she was on her way out. She was going to retire that year. She would literally write on the board while talking monotonely and erase it as she was writing it.
You gotta love those teachers because you remember them forever. There's some teachers like that.
And
you just wonder how do they survive. But
yeah, the best part of it though, the same subject that she was teaching in school that I got nothing from her on was on Discovery. So I watched Discovery and learned the same thing.
Probably in half an hour.
Yeah.
A lot more enjoyable.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for you today. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you for the interview and best wishes on your on the channel.
I loved being able to talk to Nathan about his life and experiences. This was the hardest podcast for me because I care about this man like my own father. I hope everyone got something from this and enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.